prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Gius aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'iter communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'iter communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'iter communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene.
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Gius aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
Di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'iter communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'iter communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'iter communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene.
Questo è un luogo che genera dialogo,
Qualcuno che si impegna, che si batte.
che approfondisce la conoscenza e sostiene la fiducia. È un crocevia dove si incontra chi desidera il vero, il bello, il giusto e il bene. È una testimonianza di speranza nel cuore ferito del presente. E tutto questo esiste anche grazie a te.
Allora, buonasera e grazie soprattutto a voi che siete qui.
Good evening. Thank you all for being here tonight. It's a pleasure to see you all, and it's a pleasure to be here at the Rimini meeting. First of all, go and rebuild my house. This is the title of this meeting. I will introduce our guests. This meeting was actually the result of another meeting, a lunch. We had a lunch with Franco Nembrini in Rome. He's a writer, he's a teacher, a pedagogist, but he doesn't have a microphone otherwise. And Alessandro Sortino, thank you for being here. He's a TV author, he's a writer. So that was a lunch that lasted 5 years. We left the restaurant around 5 o'clock. And this little book that I have here is the summary of the encounter between these two people who are really extraordinary people. And I hope that tonight we will be able to share with you what we talked about. Sortino wrote a book, The New God, the history of the first Christians who brought Jesus to Rome. So I'd like to start. Franco, do you have a microphone? Maybe you're sitting on it. Very good, very well. Because, well, Peter and Paul, when they arrived in Rome, they were normal people, just like us. Franco, I'll start with you. Two worlds that were, well, different in terms of age, education. There's teaching on the one hand, journalism on the other, and then these two people meet. There's a spark. Can you tell us the story? Well, I was in Rome at a church to talk about Dante. He came without even telling me that he was there. I didn't know him, actually, but after the lecture, he joined me at the bar, at the cafe, where go and have a drink after my speeches. And he showed a certain interest for what I had just said. And he asked me to have an interview with the director of TV 2000 for a project for the presentation of the Divine Comedy. So that's when I met him for the first time, and I was struck by something that is the great curiosity that you showed for things that either you didn't know very well, you didn't know me at all, my story, CL, the world as it was at the time, the world of the church, the Catholic world, and the Divine Comedy. Well, everything that I was actually standing for, everything I talked about in that lecture in Rome, and you had this great, strong, unprejudiced curiosity. You weren't following any special scheme to meet. So when I'm approached like that, with curiosity, by someone who wants to understand what's happening, but this really makes me feel enthusiastic. I don't feel labeled. So that's how we became friends, or at least this is my point of view. I want to tell my side of the story, though. But the theme of our meeting will come back later. Anyway, so the same encounter, well, I'll tell you in a different way. I was the creative director of TV 2000, and I was desperate, literally desperate. And I was desperately seeking people who could talk in a normal way, with normal words, about God, about the gospel, about reality. Everybody told me, you need to meet Nembri. I'm an outsider, or I was an outsider to his world. So this friend of mine told me, you really need to meet Nembrini. And he insisted and insisted, and he told me he's going to give a speech in a church today. But it was one of those days when I have a family lunch. There was the Sunday roast, and I was really full. I went to listen to his speech. He was talking about a book by Minier Manara, and I remember my struggle against against the sleep, because I didn't know anything about him, about the book, and I was really struggling not to fall asleep. And actually, well, afterwards I went to meet him at the cafe, and he talked to me, and he told me, think about the apostles who had believed in someone who was then killed, and they feel beaten, and then he comes back, and in the end he goes away. If you don't understand all of this, then it means you don't have, you don't understand the sense of Christianity. So, well, actually, you cannot not call Jesus the resurrected Jesus. I have to find a way to make him present in the when he leaves after his resurrection. So, well, this place is the church, obviously, but it is also a place where people get together. And I remember this experience of being really seen. I was still trying to win my struggle against my lunch, and he was already thinking about his next commitment. But we looked at each other for a moment, and this experience to be seen and listened to is an experience that I had in the past with other people of CL, that I have met for professional reasons. And every time I meet someone who had met Father Giussani, I realized that these people had an attention, a special attention for me. It wasn't just some kind of, light curiosity, but rather the capability to listen. And this led to a series of TV programs. And, well, I just wanted to say that I'm really grateful to be here in front of people who are the heir of this method, so to speak, this way to meet people. Because since I'm not part of this community, I've always felt welcomed and heard from all of you. This with Mr. Nembrini, but also with others, that amidst confusion, chaos of my life, always left me something. always touched me. So I'm asking you, since I don't think I am up to the level of this audience, I ask you to forgive me and once again to welcome me as I was welcomed before, hoping that this being together can produce an effect that goes beyond what we said. There are two things that you said, Alessandro, and I'm talking to Franco again. You talked about the encounter. Jesus is a man who meets people. We talked about building, about bricks, about building a house in such terrible times in our complicated lives. So the encounter, as I said, Jesus is someone who meets people. This is a bit the message by Father Giussani. And then Alessandro said something that you said during that lunch, to be seen. We make a lot of problems, we create a lot of problems when we don't really see other people. Yes, this is in a way a summary of an experience, of a story. If I think of what the encounter with Father Giussani meant to me when I was 17 and what this meant for the following 50 years, I can summarize this all by saying I have been seen. I have been looked at in a certain way. So the Christian message can be summarized in exchange of looks, of gazes. That is the look of Jesus for his disciples, for instance. And one of the expressions I love most by Father Giussani is when he talks in a visionary way about the different episodes of the Gospels. He says about the disciples that they looked at Jesus talking. They looked at him talking. They were really captured by the way he looked at them, and they looked him in the same way in return. So my experience as a teacher in the school, when we talk about families with our students' parents, so Christianity in history is the look of God upon men that gives man back to himself. So, well, I have the impression that Jesus brought the look of God in history, that is to say, the opportunity for men to exist in a free way. If God looks at me that way, there is no power that can define myself, my future, my fate. My fate is my relationship with God. It's the birth of a new conscience. That's what you're talking about. The book by Alessandro really thrilled me because of this, because it talks about the arrival of Peter and Paul in Rome and the birth of Christianity in this way, by describing the miracle of the birth of Christianity as the birth of the self, of the person, and of the opportunity of freedom. Even when the Christians were martyrs and were killed by the Roman emperors, and this freedom wasn't possible before. So his book, The New God, that's what I want to say. Read it. Read this book. It is really worth it. I was really struck by the fact that he managed to do three things at the same time. To tell the story of Peter and Paul following what we find in the traditional texts, to be some kind of a tourist guide of Rome and the most significant Christian places, things that you'll never find in the traditional tourist guides. And then also in his comparison with Peter and Paul, he explains what Christianity is for him today by saying, in summary, what is the content of the Christian announcement. So you find these three things. You find a catechism, you find a tourist guide, and the story of two people like Saint Peter and Saint Paul. So now, let's look at the book, The New God. There's a fish on the cover page. So this was the way by which Christians used to represent Christ. Peter and Paul arrive in Rome. Well, I've known Alessandro for like 30 years, and I've always been touched by your journalistic rigor, but at the same time, your enthusiasm. Anyway, let's look at the book, because there are so many things to say about it. Peter and Paul, after traveling a lot, at the end they arrive in Rome. But when they get there, they arrive in Pozzuoli, actually, and they found Christians there. They were already there. Yes, this is a very special aspect of the story that maybe has a more profound meaning. You know how much cities want to state that their church has origins in the lives of the disciples. So the fact that Peter went to Rome, and this is something that only Rome as a city wants to underline. It would be an honor to be say the church of a certain city has been founded by Peter. So it is probable that Peter went to Rome, but when the revelation of Jesus after resurrection happens, and the apostles find all the crowd waiting for them. There are so many different peoples, because there were different cultures, and there were some Romans there too. So we can think that Roman Jews who were in Jerusalem and received this announcement went to their synagogues in Rome, because there were a lot of synagogues in Rome, and anticipated this testimony of Christianity among local Jews. So when Peter and Paul arrived, above all Peter, when he arrived, he already found a community that was questioning the nature of this announcement. And it is incredible when Saint Paul arrives in Pozzuoli, he lands in Pozzuoli at the port. There are some Christians waiting for him, Christians who didn't know him. So it is incredible to think of the speed with which this message went around. And here I go back to what Franco was saying. If we find ourselves reading this story, the story of Christianity, there's something new, there's a novelty, something that never happened before. That's why the title is The New God. It is just like if today a fisherman from Abruzzo would tell us that the son of a carpenter from Molise is God. Other religions also talk about a God that became a man. so many different stories. Hercules, for instance, they were all stories that took place in some kind of mythical time, whereas the testimony of the first Christians is the reporting of what happens. It's a chronicle. So it is the experience, the direct experience to have met someone, a man that said he was God. And this man who said he was God has resurrected. So he's part of the being together in their name. So this experience at the same time produces or gives everyone some kind of holy status from every point of view, politically, economically, socially. For anyone, people from Egypt, France, men, women, free man or a slave, any man that would meet this message would receive some sort of blessing, because some sort of anointing, because this makes it possible for everyone to be sold in their hope. This message is a message that still changes the life of everyone, because it states, or rather it gives an answer to the mystery that is every one of us. I think that sometimes when we talk in theological terms, in terms of Christian theology, a theology that is an explanation of the mystery of man, because God became man. So to talk about a theology which is also anthropology, story of God, which is at the same time the story of man, well, this is a political act. What do I mean by this? It's an act that looks at man as someone who is unmeasurable, who can't be used in any possible way. So this immeasurability is not something that is born today. It's something that has always been there. But Christianity gives a response, or a hope of a response. And we have to ask ourselves why today we often we aren't able to give people this kind of answer, and why this answer, this response, in a moment where everything seems to be tumbling down, has become inaccessible. So this is the question.
Franco, now my question is to you. We talked about a relationship between power and the heart. Power cannot reach anywhere because power is intangible. Yes, I was claiming this because many Christians of the first years were killed because they refused to make sacrifices. The Roman world was very advanced. In some sectors, this form of religiosity was very formal. So if we had been said the same thing today, like, for example, make a sacrifice, for example, kill a pigeon and devote it to the emperor, probably somebody would react like that. and would say, okay, why don't we do that? However, these men considered this sacrifice, this act of sacrificing an animal to the emperor and eat it, as an access gate to the evil, the evocation of the devil, and something for which they could die if they had done it. And that was the main reason of their persecution. So their sacrifice was therefore completely different. It was reversed, where the sacrificing lamb is God himself. If we reflect, if we think about the dynamics of sacrificing, in other words, of making something sacred, and that is to say, of excluding somebody's soul, that our inner self is definite, it is in a way solid in the name of the person who is excluded. If we think about the way in which this process takes place inside ourselves, because we exclude a part of ourselves, to build some kind of compliance to a model that is imposed on us, well, then we can understand that actually reversing this sacrifice in broad terms is itself a political act. It is a political act because it frees man from his subduance to power, because nobody can be sacrificed, because the sacrifice is committed once and for all against the meaning of sacrifice. So the heart of man is intangible. Power cannot reach the heart of man. I mean, you can ask me to do things, to respect certain rules. It's even right that you ask me to comply with certain rules. However, you cannot go beyond a certain level in the heart of man. I mean, the heart is intangible. I'd like to listen to Franco. First of all, I mean, feel free to add whatever you want. Actually, we're drawing inspiration from what you said, Alessandro, and you said there are some key terms. One of them is forgiveness. When we discuss with Alessandro, sometimes I get lost, because I'm not quick enough and deep enough, and I'm always lagging behind. What Alessandro was saying is extraordinarily significant. And this is because the question you posed before, based on what you said, was actually the following. Why is it so difficult today to find the language, to find the words? I think the answer is that because we find it hard, both adults and young people, to, in a way, live what the question really wants. I mean, the reply, the response depends on the depth and the clarity of the question. That's why I believe that a good teacher doesn't give any answers, but rather he or she helps clarify the questions. So, this issue of freedom, the issue of being as whole beings, as finite beings, having clear in mind the origin of the destiny. If you don't have this, and if you were not educated on this, well, then it becomes very, very difficult to, listen to the announcement, to the message of somebody who proposes himself as an answer. I hope you understand what I mean. I am an enthusiast of that statement by Don Giussani in 1998 before Pope John Paul II, when at the end of his speech he said that the real protagonist of history is the man who begs for Christ, and the heart of Christ who's begging for man. So the beggar is the Christian, because that's the man who feels the need for a gaze capable of making him whole and free and eternal. And that's the reason why Don Giussani loved Giacomo Leopardi, the Italian poet Giacomo Leopardi, so much, so that he used Giacomo Leopardi to thank God during Mass after receiving communion. I think he loved Leopardi, since Leopardi rejected faith and its exterior forms. And because of that, Leopardi was capable of actually getting to the heart of this question posed by man. I think what's interesting here, and this leads me to forgiveness, the interesting thing here is that man normally forgives about him or herself. I mean, he's busy doing many different things, but because of this, he's not capable of facing reality with the depth of this wish. In other words, discovering himself as a beggar. It seems to me, from an educational point of view, that is to say, from the point of view of the education that the Church owes to the world, so the announcement of faith, I think the problem lies in the simplicity and in the faithfulness, in the loyalty with which you're facing things and facts and reality in general. The nocturnal song of the errant shepherd from Asia, whom written by Leopardi, at the end of the day actually makes the shepherd ask himself, what am I made of? So actually he used a verb that refers to thinking. The speaker is now quoting from the poem by Giacomo Leopardi. And myself, who am I? What am I? I'm saying to myself while thinking. So Giacomo Leopardi defines the structure of man as he was describing it. In the contemplation of reality, in the acceptance of reality, in the listening of reality, man feels himself as a vocated being. Reality is crying, is calling for him, is yelling at him. And actually, man can answer. And here lies responsibility. So there is this constant, incessant dialogue between God, who is calling man through the contemplation of reality to be himself. But actually, man is not capable of going at that level. He actually needs reality. We needed reality to be inhabited by this calling God. And this is actually what Jesus did. The interesting thing, and I was very much struck by this, it's very interesting that Alessandro describes the arrival of Peter and Paul in Rome, and then once in a while he uses the word forgiveness. I was very struck by this, and I also have a question to him. I had also lots of questions to him. My question to Alessandro is the following. Why do you come to a stage and then you oftentimes have to use the word mercy or forgiveness? It seems to me that the word through which God speaks through reality and men meet each other is ultimately but an act of forgiveness. So the affirmation of the value of the other, of the area of the self, first and foremost, and irrespective of the conditions. Actually, it reaches there. So you have the sinner, and God calls the sinner and tells him, you are worth my blood, my sacrifice. If I understood what you wrote, well, actually, there's lots of things I'd like to add. One thing I'd like to start with. As a young child, while I was playing with my brother, I was playing ball with my brother, and he would always be the winner, I hurt my head, and I had headache during the night. I think I was 18 years old. And so I wrote some sort of a short philosophical essay. At the core of this essay, I indicated the issue posed by Leopardi and happiness. So the question I posed to myself was the following. I wondered whether it could be possible to be happy and aware to be happy at the same time. In other words, I have always been, in a way, characterized by the fact that so preoccupied, concerned by this excessive awareness. This prevents me. I mean, I observe myself from the outside, and this prevents me. This is some kind of a damnation. This is some kind of a hyper-awareness, hyper-conscience. But that has been the key to try and understand what the problem of man is when man is looking at himself, when he gets to know himself, when he applies a model to himself. To get to know yourself, you have to, in a way, correspond to, we have to match or unmatch a model which is not our own. It's a model given by the others, by the world. But we do not see the truth of that model, and so we have to kind of idealize it to build our compliance with that model. This is something that has always been clear to me in the Genesis, when Adam and Eve, after having eaten the fruit through which they could discern the good and the evil, so after becoming autonomous in their self-judgment, they discovered themselves naked. So when they look at themselves, so when they become aware, they lose God's gaze, God's look on them. And this new development brings with itself the need for them to borrow from the other one, that kind of affirm ourselves in a reality that can be shared. So when I observe myself and, in a way, comply with a model because I say that I need to behave in a given way. When I say, for example, that's the abstract, the idea that this is the right, this is the righteous, as Plato said, or like the Jews said, this is the law. So when I become subject to such a model, when I subdue such a model, I am obeying an abstract reality that does not exist, irrespective of the fact that that reality is right or wrong. In the case of the Jewish laws, it was right. I mean, it's right what those prescriptions indicate. However, the norm, where's the norm? Where is the norm? What is the norm? What is this imperative of what's right and what's beautiful, based on which we judge ourselves? So in the gospel, we then discover that those who've never erred, who've never made mistakes, so the Pharisees, are less recognized by Christ, by those who have made mistakes and who basically recognize their poverty. So those who do not divide themselves between the abstract and the tangible, but rather accept their reality as a person. So if we enter this logic, we then discover that the only way we have to see ourselves happy and to be aware of the fact that we are happy, and happy at the same time without being childish. So after passing the period in which this is natural, I mean the childhood when you are happy and you are aware of the fact you're happy. So after this season, I mean, this possibility is capable only if you accept somebody else to look at ourselves as whole beings, as we are. If I look at myself, I have to kind of blame me because I think I am not up to the model I refer to. But if I rely on the gaze of somebody else, and this other person is God who's turned into man, then his forgiveness for what I am unifies me, saves me, and makes my truth acceptable, because it corresponds to my identity. Conversely, if I am divided and do not match with the model taken from the world. Actually, I am invited to sin. I am invited to make mistakes, to exist. So that's the reason why forgiveness is the foundation of identity, because it reconstructs the unity of man compared to his need of complying with a model. And this need of building a model is very much linked to the concept of kind of eliminating the other. Why? Eliminating the other as a reality, and rather kind of taking him on as an idea, as an idol of what I want to become. I'll stop here, but I think that this is exactly today's problem. Very beautiful, wonderful. It's very interesting. I think we're bound to stay here for lots of time. Actually, we only have 20 minutes left, but after what Alessandro said, Franco, I would like to focus on a fundamental topic. So with you, Alessandro, we've talked about the risks run by the church, that Christianity runs. So, sacraments. This is a decisive issue. And I have a word, Eucharistia, Eucharisty. Eucharist. I think Alessandro should answer. I'm saying this very humbly. During the meal he was referring to, I left that meal by saying this. I said that few times in my life had I felt talking about the Eucharist with the smartness and the depth that that topic was addressed by Alessandro. Actually, I think he understands a lot about that and is capable of telling more about that. Well, then it's better not for me to address that, but maybe Alessandro should say that. Alessandro. Just one remark. This dialogue could be maybe postponed to another occasion, and I'm certain we will organize another occasion. But there's one thing that really strikes me a lot. This is a personal reflection I've been making over the last few years, and it corresponds to a question. Jesus came to the world to bring this new God, in other words, a new man. And in doing so, Jesus brought with himself and gathered around himself fishermen and really no lawyers, no graduates, so to say. Do you think you, with your heritage and this particular sensitivity and this story that was very rarely touched upon, do you think, how did it go? Why? In St. Peter's Square, why do we have 12 people and we've been worshipping them for 2,000 years as the milestones of the history of mankind? And they didn't leave so many reflections, so many books. Why? Is it that is really... Sorry, the speaker is rephrasing his thought. Do you realize that Jesus said, "Thank you, Father, because you revealed these things," so the things we're talking about, you revealed them to the simple, and you've hidden them to the wise and the intelligent. This thing is thrilling on one hand, but on the other hand, I also wonder why. What is it that knowledge of the self that you were talking about, or the knowledge of God who mirrors the self? what does this wisdom consist of, so that man is returned to himself in the simplicity of the life, for example, of farmers, fishermen, or carpenters? I hope my question is clear. I'll try and combine these questions. I don't know if I'll manage to actually repeat the same things. Maybe I was really inspired. Probably were inspired by having drunk one glass more. That's yet another way of celebrating the Eucharist. Well, from my personal standpoint, the Eucharist is a tangible, actual presence. In other words, in certain moments in my life, I did not believe in God, but I have never entirely believed in the fact that the living presence of Christ was contained in bread, and that this presence is guarded in our cities, in places, for example, even in the desert. In the desert, that sometimes is manifest in our personal or community life. So you have this presence, you have the possibility of making this presence real inside our relations. This faith is exactly what activates our faith. I would have so many things to say, but surely this faith of mine, these reflections of mine, this theology of mine, which I termed before a political act, all of this is not worth the gesture, the act of a humble human being receiving communion. Everything we say about the presence, about the topical nature of Christ, of the fact that he is present through the spirit of the church, which is his mystical body. I mean, all the things we say that St. Paul said, all these things are understandable, are perfectly understandable in taking in communion, in receiving the communion, in being in communion. The peculiarity, the specialty of this act is that it teaches us something of what we are. If something has a substance which is different from its form, and we recognize it as such, that means that the fact that we are, in a way, described by the reality we meet is always the experience of a presence that is bigger than them. In other words, the Eucharist is not only for believers, it's not only a fact for those who believe, but it's also an interpretation key of our existence, when things are what they are, but at the same time, they are the gate, the door for something that is not visible, but which is there. It exists. And in this sense, I think that the experience of the apostles is heroic, since they were called not so much to comply with some contents, so to a certain political vision or social vision or ethical vision, but rather they were called to recognize that that person they were facing actually was fulfilling their destiny, their fate in relation with the others, and that this fulfillment was made alive and present in the Eucharist, in the Eucharistic sacrament. So understanding this is the interpretation key for all the rest. without being theologists or being theologists, but in a way that truly changes our relationships with everybody. I think, but that's something that I would like to talk about in the end, I think that it is the Eucharist what truly what's really missing today as a new brick to build a church in the desert. Okay, we have 10 minutes, but I'd like to finish with this, Franco. I'd like to refer to Alessandro's words, the words he uttered some time ago in Rome. He said, okay, he talked about 12 apostles, 12 people, you have this heroic element, but none of them was Superman, none of them had superpowers. I mean, people go into the world and all of them, all the 12 apostles actually became martyrs because they were disseminating the word of God. But actually it happened that if you have 11 people going around the world and have themselves killed because of that, and nobody said, okay, no, I'm going to save your life somehow. You made a mistake, or maybe actually I told a lie. But in fact, they are facing, I mean, they are about to become martyrs, and the bodies, the dead bodies, were laid under the altar where the Eucharist was celebrated. This is what you said, Franco, before. The apostles, something new that is brought by the word of God, by the word of Christ. Yes, that's brought by the word of Christ because he was the word. I mean, the verb has been turned into flesh. This is the very basis of Christianity. Before Peter and Paul, with the Christians that he was talking about before. And that was reminded to us by Cardinal Farrell at the beginning, the spiritual exercises. And he made this example. The example of Christians reaching Rome and actually addressing us who belong to the movement of communion and liberation. And he told us, you have this task. You have to be like those Christians who, well before Peter and Paul, introduced this novelty to the very heart of the powerful of Rome of those years. What surprises me is that actually what we describe is really happening. The meeting, the encounter between me, Alessandro, and you, and the audience, the people sitting in the audience, means a gradual, slow unveiling of ourselves in history, in time, and the unveiling of that presence. As he reminds us in the book, when he says that we are the Eucharist, is the new way of announcing young people the novelty represented by Christianity. So, to answer the question you posed before, how can we reach young people today? Today, when they are so desperate, they're lost, they're confused. Actually, we can reach them if you believe that they have the heart that you talked about before, that they are truly waiting for this. So a gaze of forgiveness, a look of forgiveness, a look of a welcoming and affirmation of their value, a look that is capable of bringing the pieces together, of rebuilding what lies tend to divide and to fragment. This is not difficult. This is not difficult. I think at least also conversing with different people here in the field of education, it seems to me that everything can be in a way directed back to this appeal, to the fact that young people have to be true, that they have to serve as testimonies, and there is no heart of any young person who does not react. Then, of course, I mean, you need to support them and educate them. But if you meet God's look on us, if you intercept it, this look will always have an effect. It will always have a good, and it will always basically show the caress of Jesus that was enjoyed by the 12 apostles and that was made them so brave to disseminate the word of God up to become martyrs. That's the martyrdom of truth. We have to love the truth of man, the truth of ourselves, the good of the people, loving what's true. That's the martyrdom that we're all called upon. Today, affirming this with courage, decision, really means that we're going against a certain type of culture, certain interests, certain mediations. I mean, we need courage. I was very much interested by Alessandro by the fact that he was courageous, he was brave to, in a way, trace back the origin of Christianity, to understand what that was calling him to do now. So the stones, the bricks he visited, all the churches, this tour guide he shows in the book that he did to understand where Christ lives, where that Christ lives, the Christ that was capable of rebuilding him. I would just like to add that the Rimini meeting has always been like that, but our friendship and what happens in Rome or in other cities in the world is the hope that young people are looking for. They can be educated. They're just waiting for clear witnesses of this great hope and certainty. And then living the Eucharist as he does, I mean, I'm still not there yet, but we can learn. We can support each other. So witness, you use this word 2 or 3 times. A testimony. So the guardian is basically the person who says that and actually testifies to that. You said that in your book. You have to approach this book as not as spectators, but as witnesses, actually. Let's go back to what you wanted to say about the Eucharist. I would like to say the following. I came here after being interviewed by a journalist writing for Tracce, and I will meet her again tomorrow. And she listened to me exactly in the way in which the people of Comunale Liberazione who met Don Giussani know how to do. And I wondered what unites me with you, this idea of the immeasurability of man. We know that we exist, we know that we are a fact. Nobody can deny our existence, and yet we cannot measure ourselves, we cannot be reproduced. It's not possible to reproduce a human being. Science can, for example, determine how my brain works, but it's not capable of reproducing the phenomenon of my existence. That's immeasurable. So I am also the subject of analysis. I can be analyzed, yet I am not entirely measurable by anybody, and as such, I cannot be the object of anybody. I can only be a subject. As such, I react together with you and anyone wishing to consider man as the object, the subject of the object of an ideology, of a power, depriving him of his subjectivity. I'd like to state that man cannot be measured by he himself. He's not even the object of himself. So immeasurable his mystery is. To conclude this meeting, I'd like to say that compared to this truth that we claim through the sacrifice of the Eucharist, compared to other sacrifices that want us to be the objects. In this sharing, we are used that fighting a form of lies, the visible part, so totalitarianism, for example. So the idea that man is the object of a global vision that is abstract and external to man himself, and that the truth of man does not stem from the fact that he inhabits reality and meets the others as an event determining man himself, sorry. But what has changed today is the form of this lie. The truth of man for believers is only that, and it is unchangeable, it's immutable, because revelation is once and for all. But what changes is the language of lies, so the way in which this truth affirms itself over time. So the first thing that we should learn and do is not to be nostalgic of our own juvenile battle, in other words, of our experience of opposing lies. In the meantime, lies have changed their shape, they've changed their language, they have changed their way of acting. So the novelty of the presence of God in our life must force us to find a language that is adequate, that is suitable to the language of the evil, so of the lie that denies this immeasurability of man. If man once was made into the object of total power, today man is transformed into the idol of himself. The subjectivity of man is transfigured, and that is done when we know each other, when we use words, models, and languages, and they're not our own. We are, in a way, described through language. And that language is the result of the world that we live in. So we speak, but we are described by these words. So through the encounter, words say something, but they go beyond what they say. Because there is a meaning, there is a significance that words are not capable of providing, because they are borrowed. So today, people are built into a universe that is determined by the data of our interaction with them. So the people who, when we are in the web, for example, when we express some preferences, we do certain actions, we make decisions, we make choices, and these choices are turn ourselves into data. And so we are measured, we are known by the algorithm in a way in which we do not know ourselves. So the algorithm is proposing us a world that is measured based on what we wish. So what we wish becomes our universe. And in this madness, we can no longer recognize reality. That's why the question is denied. Because the freedom is built based on false premises as the expression of a subjectivity that is worshipped. And it is wrongly worshipped, because the very same world is built upon the data that this subjectivity has done. Actually, we are already late. Just one last thing. So the problem is that we have to be able to inhabit this immeasurability of man through a language that is not immediately considered as a form of totalitarianism, ethical totalitarianism opposing liberty. Today, young people perceive a new form of totalitarianism compared to the worship of their subjectivity produced by this mechanism. So, in order for man to be liberated by this, in order for man to become whole, when looked by the gaze of somebody else uniting him, in order for this to take place, we need to enter this reality. We don't have to be nostalgic of our battle against totalitarianism. Lies today speaks a different language. So the Christian cannot be nostalgic. He cannot be nostalgic. Is this the big risk? Just a quick remark. I'd like actually to, finish by expressing a word of hope. If things are as you state them, it would seem that it is precisely the new technologies, algorithms, and I don't understand anything about them. So those things, precisely those things are the triumph of lies. Because if you have that mechanism for which I am prompted to wish for a reality that reflects my passions, and I end up worshipping myself, thinking that I am worshipping the world, and instead it's the projection of myself, well, that's a hell. That's a hell. So Christianity can Christianity in a way break down lies? Because we have to say this. I think the way to do that, the way to break lies, is the Eucharist. We have to, in a way, come back again around the table where this presence is fulfilled in the body of Christ, constituted in the self of the people who are in communion with him. However, this is something that cannot be enacted. I mean, I'm trying to say that we need to risk losing something of our wonderful form. We need to transform our wonderful form of liturgy, of art, into an arrival, into a point of arrival and not a starting point. In other words, we need to get dirty inside this hell and recognize the need of man, the need for man to get out of this self-referentiality. To do that, we need to invent a way. What I know for sure is that language, the language we speak, does not reach. It's not fully understood. Because it is represented because the proposal made is the proposal of liberty, and this language is actually the enemy of that, while it is the opposite. But to affirm this opposite, you need to actually enter this relationship with people. I mean, lots of young people have participated in the Jubilee. Actually, I'm going to Mass. Can I say what you said before? I went to Mass, but I was the youngest this morning. And I am 55 and I was the youngest. Probably your movement has managed to, convey your faith to their children. Many other people have not done that. That's great. But is this enough? Have you seen the churches? Have you seen masses? There's a real urgency. There's a real urgency of bringing this Eucharistic language. So the presence. So Acutis actually would bring the Eucharist on the internet. I mean, they are turning somebody into a saint who actually did Eucharistic miracles. He was young. He was great for many other things. So I'm not actually to emphasize too much this, but this is a prophecy. It is a prophecy. And we should actually wonder why. We should question ourselves on this. And this is actually the question. Have you understood why we sat actually 5 hours around that table? Everything started like that. Just one reflection, one remark to understand. You're talking about a real revolution. I happened to meet a priest this summer, and at a given stage there were young children playing soccer. He was disturbed by their noise, asked what they were doing, and they replied, "We're playing ball." "I've never seen you in church in Mass," so they sent them out and then closed the field because they were not the ones who would actually go to Mass. So for him, the beginning was the sacraments, and then they could play the ball. Well, you are saying the opposite. You are saying actually, why didn't you play soccer with them to kind of earn them back and re-establish that relationship so that they can then go back to faith and Christ? Is this what you mean? Yes, but actually the ball is no longer enough. I have to interrupt you. I'm sorry, because we have to close. I think. I've been invited by the organizers to be here at the meeting. To me, it's a great honor. I think that this has been one of the most beautiful things I've done at the meeting. Listening to Franco and Alessandro was actually the most beautiful thing I've done. It was a wonderful moment, a wonderful exchange of reflections. Thank you very much to the remaining meeting. A big round of applause to Franco Nembrini. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot. And great applause to Alessandro Sortino. Thank you all very much.
Domani alle 15 Arena Tracce parlo.
Arena Tracce, tomorrow I'm going to talk with the Bishop of Perugia and I'm going to talk about communication. Thank you.
Genera dialogo.
Qualcuno che si impegna, che si batte.
Che approfondisce la conoscenza e sostiene la fiducia. È un crocevia dove si incontra chi desidera il vero, il bello, il giusto e il bene. È una testimonianza di speranza nel cuore ferito del presente. E tutto questo esiste anche grazie a te.
Vi prego, vi imploro, con umiltà e con fiducia, permettete a Cristo di parlare all'uomo.
Don Gius aveva capito il problema che avevo. Se la tua vocazione è vero, il tuo lavoro verrà fuori anche dai sassi.
di comunicare la fede agli altri, ma veramente insieme a loro riscoprire che cos'è la fede, che cos'è la fede per me. Portare Cristo agli altri, comunicarlo agli altri è l'unico modo che abbiamo per conoscerlo veramente.
L'Itere Communionis aiuta a comunicare all'esterno la ricchezza di vita, di giudizi, di tentativi, di opere che nascono dalle persone e dalle comunità. L'Itere Communionis è proprio la vita del movimento. Scrivete all'Itere Communionis le vostre esperienze, ci fate bene.